Well, it's time now for Perspective, and today we're going to get the view of some of the EU citizens whose lives have been left in limbo since the UK voted to leave the European Union. In Limbo is the name of two books that compile personal accounts of EU citizens who, having built their lives on the rights of freedom of movement, are now worried for their future. One of the editors of the book is an Italian-born interpreter who's been living in the United Kingdom for over a decade. Ms. Elena Remigi joins us now live. Ms. Remigi, thanks for your time. Can I just start simply by asking you, what is your personal experience of being in limbo, as you put it?
Well, it was difficult for me as well when I started, for instance, applying to get my citizenship. I had to go through a true bureaucratic nightmare. It took me a year, and I realized that I was not the only one in this boat, that the Home Office was truly hostile to us. And this led me to find more about EU citizens' rights, and led me to think that it was important for us that our voices could be heard. So the idea behind In Limbo is to put together voices so that they can become a collective one, a much stronger one, because EU citizens have been left in this limbo. Their rights haven't been guaranteed since the referendum, and now the only solution we have is the settled status, which doesn't guarantee all our present rights.
Well, I'm going to ask you more about that settled status in a few minutes, but you say the administration was hostile to EU citizens, and yet they say their default will be to accept people rather than reject them, and you personally have had your case settled.
Well, this was pre-settled status. I applied for permanent residency and then citizenship. And this permanent residency, for instance, does not allow, for example, a spouse of, for example, a French spouse of a British citizen who is a stay-at-home mom to get permanent residency and therefore citizenship. I remember sending 5 kilos of documents in order to prove my existence here, and another 3 to get citizenship. So it wasn't an easy process.
Indeed, some of the testimonies you've gathered in your books, In Limbo, suggest that a lot of people, because of the uncertainties, are already acting on it. You know, there's people that have already upped sticks, if you like, and leaved, sometimes families being split. Give us a few examples.
Well, more than that, the more people who are having, thinking of a plan B. Some people have already left the country and therefore split their family because of the uncertainty. Especially if you are a person with an illness, if you have in certain difficulties, to have to bear all this uncertainty, not knowing what your future is going to be, is sometimes hard. And we've seen that people are becoming more and more worried. And this, I'm not saying only of EU citizens here, it's also British citizens in the EU. It's this prolonged uncertainty, this continuous wondering what is going to happen, and the prospect of a no deal, which really worries us.
At the same time, indeed, we don't have anything signed, sealed and delivered on paper, but overall, both sides, both the UK and indeed in Brussels, are saying that they want EU citizens already living in another country will be given the right to stay. So is it, in a sense, worrying for nothing? I mean, all going according to everybody's plans, it will work out all right.
Well, I must say, first of all, that settled status is an application, this for EU citizens in the UK. It's not a simple registration, and therefore an application can always be refused. It's going to be done via secondary legislation, and therefore this allows for changes, future changes without parliamentary approval. This leaves us in more uncertainty. And also we see now it doesn't work on you have to use an app. This app doesn't work on every iPhone, on every phone, for instance, doesn't work on iPhones. We've seen already quite a few mistakes. Of course, this phase is a trial, but still, we've seen a lot of people being granted pre-settled status rather than settled status. And now with the new immigration bill, which passed its second reading the other day, we are left without, EU citizens will be left without a legal status. And all this is going to create basically two sets of children, of citizens, those who came here and can apply for settled status, the other ones coming afterwards, but they will be undistinguishable. And therefore this will lead and can lead to discrimination when, for instance, you want to rent, to open a bank account. And EU citizens already are struggling to do all these things because we live here with the hostile environment. We shouldn't forget that Theresa May started the hostile environment in 2012. And of course, it was mainly aimed at non-EU citizens. But once we become like them, then it will affect us too.
That hostile environment that you're talking about, is that just in relation to the administration and politics, or have you seen changes in your everyday walk of life?
Well, unfortunately, the atmosphere has changed since the referendum. The narrative has changed. EU citizens were perfectly integrated, were perfectly happy to live here. And all of a sudden, we've been called, we've been considered a weight on the system. We become a little bit the other. And I've seen, particularly in strong leave areas, I've read testimonies of citizens, and particularly Polish or Eastern Europeans, who really struggle in their daily lives to go out and to be able to speak, for instance, their own language. There's been a rise in xenophobic crimes, 41% since the referendum. So things have changed. Of course, if you live in London, for instance, some cities will remain quite cosmopolitan, quite open. But all of a sudden, we feel a little bit, different and unwelcome, almost unwelcome guests in our own home.
Finally, you sent around 1,000 copies, I believe, of your two books to MPs, MEPs, EU ambassadors. Did you get any replies?
Yes, we have. We've had replies on both sides, from Barnier, for instance, from many MPs, and MEPs have been, in some cases, very close to us and tried to help us. We've been, for instance, presenting the book at the European Parliament. We are hoping that our voices are heard, because the suffering needs to be heard. You can't leave people in 2.5 years of uncertainty and now worrying about settled status. Had our rights been ring-fenced, I think even in case of a no deal, we could have carried on with our lives as usual. But in this way, it leads us open to this hostile environment. And this is, something many worry about.
Indeed, clarity, vital it sounds. Ms. Elena Remigi, yes. Thanks so much for joining us live to tell us more about your project, the In Limbo project, to bringing forward testimonies of EU citizens in the UK and British citizens in the rest of the EU. Quick reminder for you now at home of our top stories this hour. More anti-government protests planned in Venezuela this Wednesday. The government targeting opposition leader Juan Guaido, meanwhile, with a travel ban and by freezing his bank accounts. Nicolas Maduro says he is ready to speak to the opposition in the presence of international observers. Speaking to France 24, meanwhile, Guaido says the only way forward for the country is fresh elections. And as we were just looking at there, it was a rapid no from the European Union to a bid from British lawmakers that tabled amendments they want to see in the agreement already signed concerning the UK's withdrawal from the bloc. Theresa May says she now has a mandate to negotiate, but Brussels says the deal is done.